Half of Leela and the Acharya family. I think they have, and of course someone who took a lot of initiative. We are gathered here today for rundown on who we are and how did we land up on this planet Earth, right? Yeah. So without, and the gang is supposed to increase, right? Yeah. So without further much ado, over to you, sir.
Who is he, sir?
My name is Purushottam, Babu to most of you. So today we're going to talk about the Arvathokkalu Haritas family. But before that, some thanks need to go out. First to Leela auntie for hosting us here, and it's been a long time, so it's great to see you. Of course to Suman and Aradhana, they are the protagonists here in chief, in some sense, that they have made this happen by asking the difficult question of who we are and where did we come from. That's what we're going to talk about today. It's about two somewhat familiar words to some of you, Arvathokkalu and Haritas. But let's get to understand it a little more and see where it goes. We may not have all the answers, but we have a lot of answers. And there is opportunity to get further. And there are sources. And those of us who are interested can drive that forward and see more of who you are and where you came from. But we already have some kind of template, and that's what we're going to be sharing with you today. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Raghu is the chief architect of putting this whole set of slides together. He also has the technical expertise of the next level as far as Sanskrit is concerned, so I'm going to hand it over to him to talk about Haritasa and the Pravara.
Yeah. So,
ನೀವು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗ್ರಿ ನೀವು ವಿಡಿಯೋದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾರಿ
thanks a lot. For those who sort of half know me, sort of don't know me very well, I'm his brother. So, thanks to everybody, thanks for the gathering, and thanks, Suma, thanks Auntie, for getting all of this together. Right. Basically, I think the starting point, I think all the background has been said. So, the starting point of where we, or who we are, starts with what is known as the Pravara. The Pravara is essentially what defines the lineage, how we know, as to who we are. So, the Pravara has the top three rishis who define our lineage. And then the fourth person is the person who defines the Gotra. Yeah, so let me read that. So, Angirasa, Ambarisha, Yamanashva, Traya, Rishaya, Pravaranvita, Haritasa Gotro Bhavasya, Ashwalayana Sutra, Rikshaka Adhyagi, Krishnamurti, I put Krishnamurti's name, Sharma Ahambo Vivade, that's how we normally introduce ourselves to elders and to teachers and all. So, out of this, there are four pieces. So, can you go to the next slide? So, there are four pieces of information that come out of this particular Pravara. One is
Yes, he is the man. Eldest.
I just lost authority to speak.
I'll settle.
Senior most of the Haritasas over here.
Senior most Haritasa is here.
We've got the senior most of the Haritasas here, so I've lost my authority to speak. Sudhindra, you want to come and take over? So, just for people to catch up, just to catch up for Mukunda and Sudhindra and Suma who just joined, we just read the Pravara, and so we're now trying to get into the Pravara and trying to decipher what it is all about. So there are four parts in the Pravara that's of importance to tell us who we really are. One is the top lineage from where we came. That is the Pravara part, right? And then we have the Gotra, so that's the second tier. And then that tells us, that identifies our lineage. So between Pravara and the Gotra, we identify the lineage. And then you have the three other parts that we're going to talk about. One is the Veda, what Veda we belong, what Veda we follow. Then is the Shaka of the Veda. Shaka is essentially branch. We'll come to that in a bit. And then the Sutras of the Vedas, Sutras of that particular Shaka. So that also we come to. But this part, the second part of it, identifies persuasion or mastery or expertise that this particular group of people have. And that they were meant to take further, preserve and take further. Okay. So take to the next slide now. Alright, so basically I want to just define the shakas. So the shakas are essentially branches. And so when we say branch of a Veda, you're basically saying that that branch is edited somewhat of the basic original Vedic text. They are edited versions essentially to suit a particular purpose. And that purpose would be the purpose that is meant for the associated sutras and so on, right? And those sutras apply for a very specific task that needs to be performed. Alright. So over this, I've just mentioned Rig Veda. There are other Vedas, but I have not mentioned those because we're not so much interested. But other Rig Vedas, there are totally 21 shakas that used to exist, of which 6 have been identified, and there are 2 which are really alive. That means you have all the verses of those 2 shakas. So I just mentioned the 6 that are known today. One is the Sakala Saka. It's called Shakala Saka. So that's the most prominent, and that's the one that's really alive. It's got about 10,552 verses. Okay? Then you have the Bhaskala Shaka. This is not available. It's completely gone. Right? And it's mentioned in some of the Puranas. And that's how we know that such a thing existed. Then you have the Sankhya Shaka. And this is mentioned in the Agni Purana and so on. But that is also not available. So these 2 are definitely not available. Then this is our Shaka, Ashvalayana Shaka. There's controversy over here. There are some texts that say Ashvalayana is barely surviving, there are only a few verses left and so on. But there are others who say all of it is available there, but 10,761 verses or so. So that's what they say. So, but I will go with the more optimistic. I'll go with the more optimistic viewpoint and saying that all 10,761 verses are available somewhere. Somebody has it. And so we belong to that. I mean, we are supposed to preserve this and take it forward, right? And basically the source of this Ashvalayana Satra, I mean, how do we know that it exists? We have the Srauta Sutras and the Agni Puranas mention this particular Shaka, right? Then you have the Mandukeya Shaka, this is also not available, and the Bhavicha Shaka, mentioned in the Saptapati Brahmana and the Apastamba Sutra and so on. So, but these are also not available. So you can see that there are just 2 of them that are barely alive, right? They're just available. Now, one thing that we do know is that the oldest could be the Ashvalayana. So the oldest Shaka seems to be the Ashvalayana, right? And it's mentioned in the Agni Purana. So like this, there are other Vedas and so on. There are totally, if you take all the Vedas, 1130 total shakas are available, of which only 12 for all the Vedas are available today. Or there's only 2 from the Rig Veda. That's where we are today. Okay, so that's the background and barely surviving. Can you go to the next slide? So then we come to the Gotra part. So we've talked about the Pravara, we talked about the Sutras and so on, but we want to go back to the Gotra and say, who is Haritas? So we know that Haritas is the grandson of Ambarisha and Yavanashva, and son of Yavanashva. And he was a Kshatriya king of the Ikshvaku dynasty. Ikshvaku was the son of the god Surya. And he is the Surya Vamsha, he was the start of the Surya Vamsha, right? He was the one who started the Surya Vamsha clan. And somewhere along the way, well beyond Ikshvaku, come Ambarisha and his son Yavanashva. And their son is Haritas. Now Haritas is supposed to have left his kingdom to do penance because he committed a sin. And he says, I've got to get rid of the sin that I've committed. What was the sin that he committed? He was unable to protect a cow from being killed by a lion. And he sees the lion about to attack the cow, and they say, no, you're not so, because the duty of the king was to protect the cows. That was the currency of that day, if you will. So he wasn't able to protect it, and so he feels that he's got to cleanse himself of that sin, and so he goes away and does penance. And after a long penance, he is granted a boon by Lord Narayana, as I said. And as part of the boon, of course, he's expiated of all his sins and all that, but as part of that boon, what Lord Narayana gives him is that whoever, from this point on, you are able to produce brahmanas. That is, you are able to generate an entire clan of brahmanas, and they are able to take knowledge forward. See, essentially, in those days, if you go back in time, there was a clear distinction and demarcation in terms of who was going to do what. It was not the duty of the king to preserve and protect and further the knowledge, body of knowledge. Even though he was a king, he was allowed to set up a Gurukula and get students to learn and so on and so. They take the body of knowledge forward, and they would definitely be called brahmanas, because even though he was a king, they would be called brahmanas. That was the subtlety there. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Now let's go back to sutras, right? Sutras are of 4 types. You have the Srauta Sutra, which provides guidance into the Rigvedic verbs to perform rituals, right? The second is the Sulabha Sutra, which basically provided the mathematical equations to set up altars for performing various kinds of rituals. So that was the second part, right? And this one is we've not been able to find any connection with the Haritas over here for the Sulabha Sutra. Then the third one is the Grihya Sutra, that provides guidance to perform rites of passage ceremonies. Rites of passage ceremonies are basically those that are the Upanayana and those. They're basically the Shodasha samskaras. The 16 samskaras that one performs from birth to death. And so those, how they are supposed to be performed, that was part of the Grihya Sutras. And from those we have now derived various ceremonies that we now perform in the Shodasha samskaras. Then of course the last one is the Dharma Sutra, which was essentially guided what were the duties, what is the law of the land, and what is the law of society that society would follow, and so on. So those were the 4 types of sutras, and of that, the Haritasas were only associated with the 2 of them. Okay? And of that, there was a specific body of text that we used to follow. It's called the Ashvarayana Srauta Sutra and the Ashvarayana Grihya Sutra. These were the 2 bodies of text that was basically used for performing ceremonies and other things that are associated with these 2 sutras. Next slide. Alright, so now we come to the lineage. So it's sort of a more graphic picture. So we've got the top 4 people. We've got the Angirasa, Ambarisha, Yavanasha, and Haritasa. Now you'll notice that Ambarisha, Yavanasha, and Haritas are essentially Kshatriyas. And Angirasa is the Rishi. So basically, if you start from Brahma, because Hindus all over the world, they try to trace themselves back to creation, to Brahma basically. So how do we go back to Brahma? We have to keep track of that, or that has been the system that's been set up for us. So we start with Brahma. Brahma, when he creates, the very first set of people he creates are the Saptarishis. Angirasa is one of the Saptarishis and one of the Manvantaras. So he's the Rishi, right? And then the Ambarisha, Yavanasha, Haritas, they are the kings who followed Angirasa. What that means is they basically were taught by Angirasa. Whatever systems that they followed, they were taught by Angirasa. That's how I interpret it. Because otherwise, there is no other way to interpret it. Because here you have Kshatriyas and you have a Rishi here. So how do you interpret that? So that's the only way that we do this. So when you read the Pravara, you'll be careful how you interpret the Traya Rashaya part of the Pravara. So anyway, so that's the top 4 people of our lineage. And we have, at that end, we have the last 4 above my generation, last 4 generations of the particular lineage that we come from. So the earliest one that we know of is Krishnacharya. So he was born probably 1830, 1840-ish is what we think.
More like 14.
1840-ish is what I think is. Then he had two sons. I mean, he may have other daughters as well, but we don't know. He had two sons, Govind Krishnacharya, who was born in 1868-ish is what we have been able to decipher from various things. Then we have Venkat Krishnacharya, born approximately 1870-ish, somewhere there. So do you have more information? Venkat Krishnacharya, when he was probably born? Tata. No, okay. So that's Govinda Krishnacharya and Venkat Krishnacharya. Then their next generation is Govindacharya is my grandfather, born to Govind Krishnacharya, and Vasudevacharya is also. Huh? Yeah. Okay. So we will talk more about this, but essentially this sort of lays down who are the bottom four of our generation. So next slide. Yeah. All right. So this one is a little more clear. So we talked about the first two. The next generation, Govindacharya, Vasudevacharya, they had two sisters. We know that they had two sisters, but we don't know their names. I met them just very briefly, and way back when I was probably a young kid, but I cannot for the life of me remember their names. It was like, they would never, society being what it was in those days, we couldn't have a clear interaction. Money and children, they are completely a different kind of a lifestyle altogether. So that was not possible. Then we have on this side, we have Sudhindra's father, Krishnamurti. You remember your father's sister?
Elder sister.
No? He had one elder sister.
From my father's side, the only person I remember distinctly, clearly is your grandfather.
Oh, okay. So it's
Krishnamurti.
Krishna, this one.
Krishnamurti.
This is Sudhindra's father. So you go to the next generation. You see Kashi. So that was Govindacharya's children, right at top there. So you have Kashi.
Sorry, Krishnacharya had four. How? I didn't understand that.
Krishnacharya had two sons.
Two sons, Govinda Krishnacharya.
Venkat Krishnacharya. Then you have Govindacharya, Vasudevacharya.
Okay, they had Krishnamurti. Okay.
Okay, then Venkat Krishnacharya had Krishnamurti.
Okay.
See, the beauty of the system that was there prevalent at that time was that there was a three-name pattern that was followed. That's been broken now, but if the three-name pattern is, for example, if I take my side of the thing, Govindacharya, Govind Krishnacharya, Krishnacharya. That was the pattern. So when my father was named, he took the name Krishnamurti as opposed to Krishnacharya. Right? And if you take, for example, in Sudhi's case, Venkat Krishnacharya, you can see Krishnacharya, Venkat Krishnacharya, Krishnamurti, and Venkatesh. So instead of Venkatesh being, he named himself Venkatesh, but then he's actually Venkatacharya. Right? So that was the pattern. So there's this three-name pattern, and it's not only true in our families. It's true in, for example, in my wife's father's side also. They are Venkat Ramana, and Venkata. So it's been a tradition in our way, the way we name. So the eldest son takes the lineage forward. So that was supposed to be, but in my case, it was broken. It was broken in my case. I became Raghunandan.
Basically, ನಮ್ಮ ಮನದೇವರು ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ ದೇವರು. In and around that Srinivasa dates are
So I think any questions on this line? No. All right. So let's go to the next one. So here, what I want to do is we want to trace the journey. Where did we come from, and how did this happen? So what happened is, as time went by, around 400 AD, we see that there was a group of 60 families, actually 64, specifically 64 families, that migrated from a place called Achhatra in Uttar Pradesh, what is now near Bareilly.
Yes.
Again, Uttar Pradesh
We
is
don't know. We don't know. We could be even before that. We have evidence from
Go
Harichandra.
back from there, yesterday's looking around, we are much, we are from Persia and other places. So, our ancestry is.
We're all from Africa.
All right. So anyway, let's stay with what we know for certain. So Ahichandra is a place in Uttar Pradesh. What is close to today's Bareilly. So that's where these 64 families used to reside, and the king of Kadamba invited them to come over to the Kadamba region, Kadamba kingdom, for performing some yajna or whatever. And these all, see, yajna, when they perform a yajna, there are so many different roles to be played. And so they needed the 64 people because everybody had a specific knowledge to do a specific kind of a rite. So there were multiple people, multiple sets of people who were required to perform a yajna. And this gentleman, this Kadamba king, decided that he's going to perform the Ashwamedha yajna in around 400 AD or whatever. So he said, hey, I want talent, so I want to go and scout for talent and bring them over. And he brought these 64 families over to the Kadamba region. All right? And at some over time, what happened was these 64 families stuck together and they were referred to, because of the kind of knowledge that they brought, right? They were referred to as esteemed people and revered people. And that's how the name you have Arvathokkalu. So the Arvathokkalu part is supposed to be split into two. Arvathu is 60. Vakkalu, the word Vakkalu is supposed to be revered and esteemed people. And in Sanskrit, the equivalent was Shashtik Mahapurush. So Shashtika is 60 and Mahapurush is, of course, eminent people. So that is how the name Shashtik Mahapurush or Arvathokkalu came to be for this entire body of people, right? Then a small group of Haritases, including us, are part of these Arvathokkalu families. So we are part of that Arvathokkalu family, and we'll come to that in a bit, So anyway, that happened around 400 AD. 400 Christian era, basically, right? Common era. So then what happened was, by about 500, so when these people came from Ahichandra, they settled in a place called Paithani, which is close to modern day Nasik, right? They settled there. But by the time it was around 500 AD-ish, they had sort of migrated to a place called Vaijayanti, which is close to what is today Banavasi, right? So that's where they had migrated. And so you'll see in the next slide, don't go to the next slide yet, huh? You'll see in the next slide that entire path, but here's the interesting thing that I want to draw to your attention. They must have been practicing some kind of Vedic, some Vedic Hinduism, because by Shankaracharya had not yet been born. Shankaracharya's date, according to what is known and published today, is somewhere around 700 to 820 Christian Common Era, right? And Ramanuja is 1117 to 1137 Common Era, and Madhvacharya is 1238 to 1317. So all of these systems of knowledge, these three major doctrines of Vedic Hinduism, had not yet even been discovered or even established. So these people were practicing a kind of Vedic Hinduism that we are not even probably familiar with. Most likely it was very highly driven by rituals. And these rituals being directly taken from the Vedas. Because the prayer to God in the way we understand it today did not exist at that time. Everything was ritual based. So to do if you want to propitiate the gods, you have to perform a yajna kind of thing, or do a tantric procedure or something like that. So now what happens is you have Shankara coming in up to the time when you see Vyasaraja.
Pardon me if I'm ignorant, I think, but what is common era? I've never heard of this term.
Common era is anything after Christ. What is known as AD?
After Christ.
AD is now become CE.
They're no longer there.
BCE and CE.
Okay, sorry.
Before Common Era and Common Era. So anyway, so now after Madhvacharya is, we know last known is 1317 is the date for Madhvacharya. Then you have 1487 is when Vyasaraja is born. Okay, Vyasaraja, so Vyasaraja happens to be part of the Matwa tradition or lineage, right? In terms of Guru Shishya Parampara. When we come to Vyasaraja, Vyasaraja himself has written that he was an Arvathokkalu.
Oh.
That he was an Arvathokkalu. So we know that all through these years, these almost 1,000 years, right? 400 AD, 500 AD, 500 CE to approximately 1500 CE. That journey, what happened to them, we don't know. All we know is that they moved from Banavasi, they moved back to Daulatabad, what is today Daulatabad, to become part of the Chalukya kingdom.
What is today Aurangabad?
Aurangabad, yeah. So they moved back in that region around 500 AD. But how they came back into Karnataka, what happened, what were the pressures they went through, we don't know. But what is most significant, to me at least, is through all of this, they have stayed Hindus, pure Hindus, right?
Why did he say that? Because that time what was prevalent was the Buddhists and the Jains were kind of really propagating and obviously significant in dominance
Right.
in terms of thought.
Right.
But you stayed a Hindu and you didn't become a Buddhist or a Jain in spite of all those influences.
Right.
That
See,
is one.
just to add to what Prabhu said, Buddha is known as around 350 BC.
500 BC.
500 BC. So from then to Shankara is what? Around 700.
700.
That is about a span of 1,200 to 1,200 years. During that entire time, this entire country of ours used to be dominated by Buddhism. Buddhist thought, right? And despite that, these people continue to remain Vedic Hindus. And through that they've gone through. And then of course, when you come closer to the time when Ramanuja started, 1017, Islam had already invaded. So from Islam goes on, from that point on, we have always had the Islamic influence from that point on. But despite all that, they seem to have come through. And the next we know is that when it is Vyasaraja's time, Vyasaraja himself talks about himself as an Arvathokkalu. That's what we know.
And he becomes a Madhva. And because he then talks to the Arvathokkalu families who are now identityless, at best they are Rigvedis.
Yeah.
So now they have an opportunity to move into one of the three denominations. And therefore all the three denominations are available and he then talks to them to get them over to become.
Yeah, and that leads us to some amount of speculation. So why would they do that? Why would they say that I would want to abandon Rigvedic Hinduism and become part of one of these denominations? And the reason, the way I look at it is, the reason could have been that the Acharyas had said that it is no longer required to perform those kind of Rigvedic rituals. And the pujas padati that came about, whether you talk about the Panchayatana puja that was set up by Shankaracharya, the system of puja that was set up by Ramanujacharya, or the system of puja that was set up by Madhvacharya, they all said the ritualistic and tantric kind of puja is no longer required. All you need to do is to just do the standard puja, this Shodashopachara puja that we normally perform. And why would they have done it? They would have done it because they would have wanted to bring in a larger fold of people into their systems. They would have said, hey, I want a larger fold, make it easy for them to sort of embrace this kind of a system. So anyway, so
why
that
does it affect us? One of the things that Prabhu talked about was the fact that we belong to a certain shakha, and that Ashwalayana Sutra, in that Ashwalayana Sutra, the family that we belong to particularly were the Shrautra and the Grihya. And the Shrautra is all related to what he said, and they were now being watered down. And in fact, today you rarely get to see a Shrautri doing any of those kind of yajnas. So some of the expertise that was prevalent within the family were by the wayside by that.
Yeah. Next slide. Alright, so this is the dark green patch in this place is Uttar Pradesh today, and this is Ahichatra in Uttar Pradesh. That's where we started. That's where the journeys for the 64 families started. And you can see the Ahichatra in that map there. And you can see on the far map on the other side is where the Kadamba kingdom used to be. That was the region of the Kadamba kingdom. So you can see from where they have traveled and where they ended up. And even there, the upper part of that highlighted region on the far map is where Nasik is approximately. And the bottommost pass is where Banvasi is. So they traveled that distance even within the time they were in the Kadamba kingdom. They were migrating back and forth.
So by
Just-
500 CE, they had moved to.
By 500 CE, they had moved to Banvasi. Well before 500, they had moved to Banvasi, and they had sort of by 540 AD, they had already gone over to the Chalukyas in Devgiri, which is today Aurangabad.
Just think of it, the dates maybe, we don't have the date, but somewhere in that 500 odd years, you moved from the Godavari basin, which is really Nasik. You come down to the Tungabhadra, which is all river valley. Everything is a river valley, everybody lived by the river. So you moved down, and then for whatever reason, along with the difference of opinion between the Kadambas and you went back to Chalukya. The Chalukyas were the primary principalate. The Kadambas reported in, let's say, to the Chalukya. It was largely the Chalukya kingdom. So you went back to where the headquarters of the Chalukyas were, which is today's Aurangabad. So you went back to Devgiri. So some way, you come from Mahachitra, that we know. You come to Nasik, in today's Nasik. You come to Tungabhadra. Then you have gone back to the Godavari, which is the further eastwards, east of Nasik, which is Aurangabad. So if you go to Aurangabad today, just south of Aurangabad, hardly maybe half an hour, is the Godavari.
Next slide.
Maybe they got invited back.
Yeah, so that's the story. That there was the king, the Kadamba king, felt that he needed a different kind of advice, and he sought the advice of the Jains. And at that time, these people said, if you want that advice, then we are going to make our move. So the entire 64 of them moved, saying that we will find some other principalate who's prepared to support our line of thinking, or will take our advice.
Right.
So
But they do
the
come back.
story continues, and he says that, okay, now I got the Jain advice, but I want your advice back.
Yeah.
So these 64 people said, now you're, you are where you are, we are where we are, thank you very much. So they went back to the Chalukyas, and the Chalukyas then took them back, said, okay, now you guys, why don't you go back to Daulatabad?
But
It's
the
called
64
Devgiri.
remains
Today's Devgiri, that time.
The 64 family, 64 Gotras.
Yeah, 64, the good question, 64, 3 of them died in battle.
Okay.
Okay, because they are a Kshatriya originally as
Yeah,
well.
I know,
So
originally
61. So out of the 61, I think calling
One.
them 61 was maybe an odd number, so they chose 60.
No, one disappears in Thakira.
Oh, that-
The document
okay.
says one family just simply disappeared. They don't know what happened to
So
it.
60 remain. Now we have details of the 60, and I think we've got
Right, we've got
another
another slide
slide
we
to
can
talk
show.
about who the 60 are.
Sorry, but the king would want them back for the puja.
For the advice, largely, see, the sutras, there are 3 or 4, right? We've got the Shraudra, and then we've got the Shulabha, and then we've got the Grihya, and then we've got the
Dharma.
most important is Dharma.
Dharma is the
What's
most
the right
important
and
thing.
wrong? What's right and wrong? If he needs advice, you need to have that level of scholarship to be able to provide the advice to a king, to be able to talk to his subjects through Dharma. So you become one set which is complete. Everybody is complementary. Together you provide all the sutras.
That was the 60 family.
That was the 60.
Alright, so now recent history. We talked about this. We are yet to discover what happened after 500 and how we ended up at 1467. So what happened during that time? There is very little documentation that we've been able to lay our hands on. The next we hear about is in 1440-ish, where we say Vyasatirtha was himself an Arvathokkalu. Prior to that, he talks about it in a very detailed writing of his own. He's written some kind of essay, which I'm yet to get my hands on, and try to research and find out where that is. So that is then. And then he's talked about Vyasatirtha himself has talked about the Arvathokkalu families. And there appears to be some documentation from that point on. From once after Vyasatirtha, there appears to be documentation that talks about Arvathokkalus continuously from that point on to today, right? So next slide. Yeah. So here are some of the best references that we've been able to find in terms of Arvathokkalu family tree history. Shastika Vamsha history.
So Arvathokkalu is rarely used. Okay, only in common parlance, but the word that you will find is Shastika.
Shastika.
It means the same, but Shastika is the
68.
60.
So you can see most of this has been written. So starting from Vyasaraja, you have Vijayendra Tirtha, Sudhindra Tirtha, and so on. So it has, even in the Madhva tradition and Madhva Parampara, you will find sannyasis who have continued to track the Shastika. So that obviously these people had some body of knowledge which was so important that people continued to track them. And it's amazing. It's just absolutely. When I saw this, my jaw dropped. It's just amazing that you have these Swamijis trying to track the history of these Shastika.
We've got Marathi as well, so it shows that journey. Urdu,
Yeah.
but we've got Kannada, and then we've got Marathi. So the journey of the 60s somewhere is reflected into the language and I'm sure the.
You have some Telugu document also somewhere.
Talagunda.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah.
Talagunda, of course, I think has the inscriptions, the links. Yeah.
So anyways, these are the most important documents. There was a document written in 1943. I forget the name of the gentleman. Raghavendra what's the name? No, Raja Rao. What's the name? The person who some gentleman, I forget his name, who has written a document called Shastika Mahapurusha. That's the first work that outside of this body of work, which talks about the history of the 60 families. And then somebody else that is the book that came.
The book we have.
This is the book in
This is
81.
Pradeepa.
This is the 81. Yeah. Between this in 1950, there's another book that's been published, also in Kannada. This is a summary and captures both of those, the 1943 publication and the 1950 publication. So this, they say, has a lot of the information that is there in both books. All right. So anyway, I just wanted to give this slide saying that there's a lot more research that we can do, and we can get a lot more information about this. We are not even to get hold of these documents is going to be quite a journey. I'm hoping that the Vyasaraya Matha.
Maybe the first 2 or 3, there are, certainly in Sosla you may find in Mysore Sanskrit University there's a chance.
Yeah.
Maybe in Mythic Society in Ruputanga Road. Some 2-3 sources. Potentially you may find some of these books. And somebody who's really good in Kannada and particularly that very pure chaste Kannada, somebody who can understand.
Right.
Even the lipi may be difficult for some of us. So opportunity for somebody to.
Here are the families. This is the introduction to the 60 odd families. Actually, if you count them, there are actually 64. All 64 have been mentioned here. Of this, only 60 are, the 3 families have died. We don't know which 3 families have died and which one disappeared. But all of them are otherwise mentioned. And we fall under the Haritasa families. And under Haritasa families, you'll find 3 separate groups. And we are part of the Chanduru. Chanduru
and I talked about this some 10
Chanduru. So Chanduru.
How many have you been to Chanduru?
The temple is there.
How many Chanduru? It's right here. We've been several times. Right on the corner. It's amazing. It's right here.
Next slide. There we go. So that is Chanduru there in the height there. That's Chanduru. So you got Gadbalapur, you got Chikbalapur, and that's Chanduru. So right on National Highway 44 is Chanduru, right up there. And back in the day when my father and mother were alive, and when Chikaba was alive, I don't know, you were there, right? Yeah. So we all went together to Chanduru to see the temple. There's a Shrimasa temple there. But of course, it's completely in bad shape. It's very bad shape.
Agrahara. Traditional Agrahara, at the end of it, there's a small temple. There's Srinivas Devru, in terms of your conception.
Yeah.
Very few
And
families.
it's completely abandoned. There's really nobody there.
Nobody there.
There's nothing. There's no priest. There is nobody.
Not at all a developed village.
No, there was a priest when we went to did the puja.
ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಪುರೋಹಿತರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ನಾವು ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿ it was what about
ಅವ್ರ
7
ಮುಂಚೆನೆ
years
ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ
ಅವ್ರು ಬರ್ತಾರೆ.
ಅವರು ಅವತ್ತು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದು ಅಷ್ಟೋತ್ರ ಒಂದಿಷ್ಟು ಪ್ರಸಾದಕ್ಕೆಲ್ಲ ಏನೋ ಪಾಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ನೋ ಪ್ರಸಾದ. ಓನ್ಲಿ ಒನ್ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ.
ಅಲ್ಲ ಉದ್ಭವ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ.
You were told by the priest.
Alright, so I think with that I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for being patient and listening to this.
Can you go back one slide, please?
Okay, go back one slide.
One slide.
Back one
No,
slide.
I want to hear Sudhir.
What is this?
Yadav Gotra
Gotra.
Oh, what are the families? Yes. I think somewhere over here is the Gaudgare group.
Sorry?
Somewhere over here is the Gaudgare, but I can't trace them. The Gaudgare family. That
Close it, full screen, full screen. Put the Gotras.
The Gotras are a part of this. Let me read that out. Kashyapa, Atreyasa, Bharadwaja, then you have Vishwamitra, and then you have Gautama, Jamadagni, Vasishtha, Shandilya, Agastya, Haritasa, Badrayana, Kaundinyasa, and Kaushika, and the Shrivaja. So these are the
Yes, so that means like I am Vishwamitra Gotra, that means those are the families, I am the descendants of that? No.
You are only. Yeah.
Just a minute.
You understood my question?
Yes.
Answer. All Vishwamitra Gotras are not necessarily part of the are part of the Okay. So even in Haritasa, all Haritasas are not part of Arvathokkalu. So only
That's
a
a
few.
different segment.
That's a
different
This
segment.
is a different segment. For example, my father-in-law is Haritasa Gotra. He's not part of Arvathokkalu. He's not. Oh, sorry, Vishwamitra Gotra.
Say that correctly.
Yeah, my father-in-law is Vishwamitra Gotra. They are not part of the Haritas. They are not part of the
Raghu,
Arvathokkalu.
you have a friend who is Haritas Gotra, but he
They are also,
doesn't.
yeah. So we've got, I got two friends who are Haritas Gotra, but they are not part of Arvathokkalu. Yeah.
Are they not part of
One second,
Yeah.
how do you determine that we are all from Arvathokkalu?
Because that has come down to us from word of mouth from our parents.
We are
they've
Arvathokkalu
practiced and they've practiced.
Yavagu.
Yavagu Haritas. So
it's only word of mouth.
it's one of the things.
Pravara. That Pravara is what we live
Not only that, Sanjeev. Not only that, in this book, all our families are mentioned.
I think you have that say.
In this book, for example, Vasudevacharya is mentioned, and then Govind Krishnacharya is mentioned, and so on. So D.V. Krishnamurti is mentioned. So like that.
I think Sudhir also.
Yeah, Suma and Sudhir mentioned. So this book has
Sure.
lineage. So that's how we know.
Shastika.
Shashtika Maha.
So-
Where is the Gotra and then there is the
Go back to first.
So how do you?
Siva, the parties
So
on you.
it's not just the Gotra. which-
Parties on you.
It's not just the Gotra which combines.
But you have to say that.
It's more than just the Gotra.
Yes. First is the
Gotra
let's
slide
take
and
Haritas and Gotra.
ಇದೇ ಗೋತ್ರ
And then like that there are many Gotras which have come together
Yeah,
across the skill
everything is there in
sets.
this.
Yeah, across all the skill sets.
ಜಾಸ್ತಿ
Oh.
If you combine the skill sets, then you become one group, and at least you can talk to one king, and then
Oh,
he's
okay.
beholden to you in some sense.
Okay.
And then there is a give and take. You share knowledge and
These
so on.
60
So that
people have
you
stuck
must have all of
together.
it.
Okay.
So the 60s have found that complementarity and just stayed together.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
So there are multiple Gotras and families involved in this.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
60.
Here it is.
I thought it's just
Just take Kashyapa.
Yes.
If you
So all 60s, all 60 are in the Arkavatthi Valley.
Hello, just
Okay,
a
the
second.
next river basin, after the Tungabhadra, the next river basin is the Arkavathi, Pinakini, southern Pinakini, which is Bangalore, right? So this river basin is where they came to.
okay.
So all 60s, if you find, if you go to Magadi, if you go to Kunigal, if you go to Chikbadapur, Nagapur, all these villages had all these people settled in.
Yeah. They settled there.
All the urban
Correct.
persons you will find in the neighboring village.
ಬಾಬು ಅರ್ಕಾವತಿ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ನಂದಿ
Yes, so that's the next river valley. So given that everybody moved river to river, the next one after Tungabhadra is this one. So they would have just come next. Yeah.
Arvathokkalu ತರ ಇನ್ನು ಎಷ್ಟು ಗುಂಪುಗಳಿವೆ?
So you have Vadagnadu, you have Deshastha, you have all those other ones.
How many?
Maybe I
These
know
are not
this
formal
Aravelu,
groups, right?
I know Aravelu.
These are not necessarily formal groups where everybody had to fit into one group. So somebody would have formed.
You would have.
One group.
They are part of the
All
nation.
side.
Deshastha is meaning that.
We are part of the
Southern
Deshastha.
Maharashtra, Northern
Yes,
Karnataka
I
is
know
the
that.
Deshastha.
There are few little things I know.
You can't be upset with North Indians.
Sanjeev has a question.
So, you want to convert not details. Can you speak a little bit about the process that you followed
To get this.
to get this?
The process was back in about 5 years ago. See, no, wait. My mother had the 1943 publication of the Shashti Mahapurush. She managed to get it from my grandfather. Right? My grandfather had a collection of books, and one of the books that he had was this Shashti Mahapurush book. She managed to get it. And it so transpired that she had lent it to somebody and she never got it. And she was frustrated by that experience. And she told us that you're going to do something about it. Right? So back when about 6-7 years ago, we tracked one of our uncles down and we went and visited him. And we asked him whether know about all of this. We did not know the secret that he had.
He had this book.
He had this book.
He gave it to us
He
saying
said,
that I don't need it now, you take it.
I don't need it now, you take it and run with it.
So, which one is this? This is not the Shashti.
Yeah, this
This
is
is not, this is the derivative of Shastri.
This is the 81
This
publication.
is the 81 publication. Shastri Mahapurush published 1943.
Tell us what this book is first.
This book is basically a,
What's the name of the book?
This is Shri Shashtika Vamsha Pradipa.
Yeah.
so this is what Shastri. So it has summaries of two books. One is the Shastri Mahapurush itself, and there's another book, I don't remember the name, published in 1950. And both of those books are available. So when we went and met our uncle, he started talking about our family, all right. But more importantly, he actually gave us this book, and we were like, it was like amazing, that we had these finally found some source from where we could start. So once we got out of that, then we started digging more and more.
So we met our aunt, Sudhi's sister. She's 80 odd, and she had some memories. So we talked to her, she shared some data. And so, we've been just talking and gathering and then going to the web and pulling out whatever we can. This is the body of, so there is opportunity to go further in terms of books in various bigger libraries. I'm sure Mysore University or a Sanskrit libraries of Mysore. Certainly, and that mythic and Sosle.
ನಾನು
Go to Sosle.
ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ ತಾತ ಇದ್ರಲ್ಲ I went to the Sanskrit Pathshala. The Sanskrit Pathshala that he was in, was by the river. ಇವಾಗ ಹೊಸದಾಗಿದೆ. ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅವತ್ತು ಎಲ್ಲ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಯಾರು ಇದ್ದಾರೋ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಇದ್ದೇ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಬಟ್ ತೆಗಿಸ್ಬೇಕು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನೀವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ 3-4 ದಿನ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಾದ್ರೆ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮ 4-4 ದಿನ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಮೈ ಮಾದರ್ ಫ್ರಾಕ್ಚರ್ಡ್ all. So, but we have this.
Just go back to that lineage bala slide.
Aarti.
See,
It's so interesting, right?
what is important to remember here is, what is the meaning of a pandemic and what it can do to a family and how it can completely scatter everything that may have existed in the past very quickly. So, around this, okay, if you go to the web, there is the plague of Bangalore, which is 1898 to 1904. 1898 to 1904 was plague. So my grandfather himself was barely 8 years old, and Vasudevacharya was 1 or 2 years old, and I'm sure Sudhi's grandfather. Father, much, yeah.
No,
okay,
the father only.
1908.
So this father was born in 1904.
1904, yeah.
So this father was born 1904.
So during that particular period, everybody passes away. Because the plague is of that kind, so you just, you're
So we know that
no time. One of the
Krishna Chaitanya was available, was alive till at least 1902, that much we know.
Basically, at that age, all you are doing is taking the dead body, cremating and coming back. So how did they make it out? Because finally they lived off their grandfather or the father or somebody who's going out and providing some kind of a priestly service, and then you get some returns and then you run your family. If there's nobody alive, then how are you going to run? And he's the eldest at 8 or 9 years old. He's the only surviving member of this part of the family. He's got 2 sisters. He's got a brother a year or 2 old. And you can then think of how they.
So this is, you're talking about Govindacharya and Vasudeva.
Vasudevacharya.
So they were orphans at.
They were exactly. And they had nothing.
And they had like two younger sisters.
Two sisters, 4 of them. And the legend has it from my mother now is that the only advice he got at that time was you better get married. So I told my grandfather that if you get married, then you're a dampati. Somebody is going to call you and give you food. So all of you can then go together and then at least get food. Alright? So then they've come to Bangalore. So 19 something, 04, 05, 06. Right? And this is where we lose Sudhi's family. We don't know how they managed. This part of the family has come to Bangalore, and then somebody recognized the brilliance of Vasudevacharya and said, just go, you're brilliant, go, Sanskrit is your way, you're on your way, buddy. And he's somewhere around 1920, he reaches Mysore. The journey is a blur of where is Banaras, where is Kumbakonam, and where is Bangalore, or where is Doddaballapur. What he did during those, we know these are the 4 relevant places in his life. Eventually he reaches Mysore. Then the rest is clear. I'm sure that you've heard of what happened. He was Sanskrit professor, Vidwan, etc. And he.
And how
But
they
for that portion, somebody has to do some research.
Yeah. Then they had that.
Time he was asked to.
They had to see they hadn't met each other for a long time. You can't see face to face, so he had to see the image of his brother in the oil. So that's how. So they were the survivor of a very difficult time. So that is that family. And so we have come from a family which has seen some of the most difficult times in history. And if you see where we are today, I mean, it's really their great the kind of work that they've put in and kind of survival instincts that they've been able to put together, that we are where we are. The Sudhi part of the family is that's one of the reasons we met D.K. Karma, that Venkat Krishnacharya was alive at least till the late 1904 or 05. And then he may have moved on, he and his wife. So Mr. Krishnamurti, the Sudhi's father, was born around that time. He had one elder sister that we confirmed. And then he passes away early. I think he was in the army.
No, he was in
railways of the army. Railways. So he passes away in the late 40s. And then Dr. Padma, I think 1935, and Sudhi is maybe 1943 or 44? 45 born. So he just passed, they were in Chennai and he passes away, and then my grand aunt brings the entire family to Bangalore, and the rest, I'm sure, Stitcher. Her name is Rukmini, as much as Vasudevacharya's wife is also Rukmini. She's Arvathokkalu. She's from Gaudi.
She had 4 sisters.
She has 4 sisters.
Rukmini. Vasudevacharya's wife.
See, so
all of them passed away in
But it's
similar
so
fashion.
unfortunate that the women have, their lineage has not been traced so
Marriage
patriarchally. All of a sudden, if you got the elder sister, we don't know what.
Even I noticed that the ladies.
Mic उपयोग से.
Yeah, you should
Where is
raise
the
the
last
Sanjay.
the last slide? The last one?
Hand the mic.
Twice this size.
Me mic
Maybe a
about
little
it.
more, who knows? They're totally ignored
So
in this
these
entirety.
this is the
Which
list
is
of
not the
which
fault of the
families?
poor.
The original,
But it's thinking of
original Arvathokkalu
Historically,
family.
So patriarchal.
Geographical location.
The slide outside.
See the geography.
Is to speak about prominent people within the family. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Govind Krishnacharya, who we know a little bit about, and that is that he was born 1868 or thereabouts, and he died at a very young age. He died at 32 or so. So and that is how actually we know that he was alive till 1902, and so therefore we extrapolated back and said he was alive till about 1868. He was born in 1868 or so. Now one thing we know about him was that at an extremely young age he had mastered the entire what is known as the Sudha exam. In those days, it was considered an extremely tough exam.
Which exam, sorry?
Suda. You know what Suda is? Suda exam? So there is, you've heard of, you've heard of Jaitirtha. Jaitirtha has written the Nyaya Sudha. And to be a real scholar in Madhva philosophy, you have to clear an exam that is based on that text. The whole work is called Nyaya Sudha, but what is typically known as, what typically is called the Sudha Pariksha. Sudha Pariksha Madodana, Bala Bala Kashta.
It's a descendant of Jaitirtha.
Badri, oh wow, fantastic. That's great.
What is that?
No,
He doesn't know.
He doesn't know it. So anyway, that's a very nice experience.
ತಂದೆ ಹೆಸರು
ಮಂಗಲ್ ವೇಡ್ಕರ್.
ಮಂಗಲ್ ವೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಜೈತೀರ್ಥರು ಆ ಸರಿ ಆ ರಾಜವಂಶದಿಂದ ಬಂದವರು.
More like Padmanabha Tirtha. You are all Deshastha. Deshastha. Mangal Vedkar is just north of the Karnataka border. So you are all.
So we know that, for example, in the case of Govind Krishnacharya, he had just come out and he was the one who was recognized by the king. And it turned out that the king gave him a lot of land in and around the Pole. He just accepted. He said, "Name back up and give him sort of Javi Kutpudi." That's what he said. He didn't even know that he could have asked for much more. He didn't know that. He said, "Whatever you give me," and he said, "Okay, I'm going to give you land." He said, "Okay." And he came and then saw that this entire place was a rocky outcrop, and there was no way that he could use it in any way. Interestingly, that piece of land got transferred over to my grandfather, Govindacharya, and finally in 1970 they were able to sell the land. They were able to sell the land, and that's how. And to settle that land, by the way.
It was a joint holding.
It was a joint holding by all the three, by 1, 2, and 3 families. It was a joint holding. And that family got sold in 1970.
I remember one thing. Govindacharya was coming to Mysore to meet his brother. Many times I saw him. Tavla, also, he land market in the ₹120. That was a big deal in those days. It was a big deal in those days. ಆಯ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಏನು ಬೇರೆ ಮಾತಿಲ್ಲ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಮಾತು ಬೇರೆ ಆಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು ಈ ವಿಷಯಕ್ಕೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಮಾತು ಅವ್ರು ಕೊಟ್ಟರು ₹100 ಇಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ರು
No document needed or nobody signing them.
Sudhir's mother, she used to come to my Tata's house.
We know about a holding Jodi Gram 99 acres.
I had heard about 92 acres. Okay, see that region.
So they had a lot of lands.
Yeah, all of that was because of the talent of Govind Krishnacharya. Right? At that young age, he was able to not only be a scholar, but he was able to impress somebody, or basically the king of the land, to say that I'm going to give you that much of land. And that was no pittance. You've got a fantastic amount of land. That means that you must have been really top. Right? So that much we know. Okay, so then we also want to talk about we want to talk about my grandfather. Basically, he talked about briefly.
Yeah, so Govindacharya himself, we talked about the plague and his ability to he survived the plague, and he and that 4 or 5 of them, his 2 sisters and Vasudevacharya survived the plague. That itself is a big deal because everybody else was popping off in those 7-8 years. We know for a fact that he married his wife from the neighboring village. She was a survivor and her entire family had got cleaned out in the plague. So she was a survivor in the neighboring village. He was a survivor, and they said the only way both of you can survive together and move forward as a family is if you get married. So the 2 of them get married. He must be some 12 or 14 and she was 6 or 7 or 8. And then they come, they're not clear about the exact name, something that sounds like Ahobal Rao or Obal Rao or somebody like that. That's my mother's recollection from her conversations. That they hosted them when they came first time to Bangalore. With nothing. With virtually nothing. Wherever, somewhere in Bangalore, somebody hosted them. And that's the name of that family. We don't know, Mahabal Rao couldn't be maybe Ahobal Rao or Obal Rao, some names very similar to that.
Basically,
And then, in fact, that elder lady of the house looked at my grandmother and supposed to have remarked, "Naan ninge ella helkodtini, neen samsara shuru maadu." At whatever 8 or 9, she knew nothing. So that's how they were. As part of that, they obviously realized the talent that Vasudevacharya had at that young age.
Your grandmother's name was what?
Lakshmi Nasamma.
Mukunda now or mane headseti hogide, we have seen.
Yeah.
Name.
So
Because Nanga, I remember going to
Nange,
so
I
many
remember.
times.
used to call her Nachi for affectionate.
Now Tumba Hoggati, because we are quite close by.
Yeah. So
I don't know, by default somebody would put me in the car.
whatever they noticed that during those years, they noticed the promise of Vasudevacharya. Obviously,
So
there was some spark.
So Vasudevacharya was with Govindacharya and your grandmother at this point.
Yeah, so the four, the two sisters, the two brothers, and my grandmother, that was the
My
five
Dodappa
stars.
was famous
I
for
see.
And then obviously
But
they were
that's
supporting each other in whichever way with the help of this Rao slash
everybody
Rao.
ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು in that put
And then as part of that, they noticed him that maybe there is tremendous promise. And then he was moved from college to college, I mean, or school through the Bhatta system. And then his Sanskrit promise really got him to Mysore. And then, of course, he became Asthan Vidwan and
No,
so on and so
there is
forth.
a gap in our knowledge as far as that is concerned.
Varana concept.
Where did he go? When did he go to
That's
Kumbakonam? When did he go to Kashi?
That is the 10 years.
Yeah.
Raghu has a book which is BVK's publication. And in that book, there is no mention of either Kumbakonam or Varanasi. And that suddenly has put the cat among the pigeons. So, what we always believed till now was about this Kumbakonam / Banaras before he went back to Mysore. That is the one. Do you have a photo?
I've got a photo.
Okay. So that book, if we hadn't found it, we were along the same line, thinking that it was Kumbakonam / Banaras. In those days, that was the place that you went to argue out. If you were a scholar in any philosophy,
But I remember
you went to Kumbakonam to argue with her.
No, I remember that.
Varanasi for sure.
Varanasi.
Yeah, he was
Manna Hedi.
exactly. I remember not only Sini, even during our young days, my grandfather used to mention something about Kashi.
Because the only one my grandfather spoke to was Mukunda, by the way.
Yes, correct.
Mukunda and Sukanya are the only two people he
Two
spoke
people,
to.
correct.
None of us, he would never speak to any one of us. So I don't know, for some
Yeah.
strange reason, Tata would speak only to Mukunda and to some extent to Sukanya. Other than that, he would never talk to any one of us.
He had an expert in space reading. So he knew who was intelligent, who was not.
Vasudevacharya was found.
I heard one story that
I Kashi
our grandfather was staying in somebody's house and I mean living off of them, and they wanted him to marry their daughter or something. And because he heard of that, overnight he in the morning before.
It's a very strange way of meeting in the community. Small, Arvathokkalu. People were interested to know from where we came and what we did, how we finally has ended up here. ನನ್ನ ಒಂದು ನೆನಪುಗಳು ದೊಡ್ಡಬಳ್ಳಾಪುರ ಬಹಳ ಕಮ್ಮಿ. ಯಾಕೆಂತೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನನ್ನ ಒಡನಾಟ ನನ್ನ ತಂದೆ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಬಹಳ ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಇದ್ದಿತ್ತು. When I was 3.5, I lost my father. ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಚೆನ್ನೈನಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು. I was born in the house at Perambur. Then after that, since my mother's brothers, sisters, everybody was in Bangalore, we moved to Bangalore. Subsequently, the only close contact about Dodballapura was his grandfather. He was quite close because he used to come for every ceremony of my father. He also came for my munji and told my mother, 10 ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು ಮುಂಜಿ ಮಾಡೋ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಇತ್ತು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಸಬ್ಸಿಕ್ವೆಂಟ್ಲಿ we had a common interest was the land which the Dodballapur family owned. ಜೋಡಿಗಿರವ 99 ಎಕರೆ. ಸಿನ್ಸ್ ಪರ್ಸನಲ್ ಯಾರು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದು ನೋಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ ಸ್ಥಿತಿಲಿ ಯಾರು ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ವಾಸುದೇವಾಚಾರ್ಯ ಮೈಸೂರು, ನಮ್ಮ ತಂದೆ transferable job. He was in MSM Railways. My father, Krishnamurthy, was in MSM Railways before the Indian Railways came. And my mother always would say that he was a very religious man, and for his father's ceremony he would go to Tirupati, for his mother's ceremony he would go to Mantralaya, in the car and come. And ಇವರು ತಾತ ತುಂಬ ಮನೆಗೆ ಬರೋರು. And unfortunately, his last days in Nehru Nagar, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮನೆ ಅವರು ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ನನಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಸುದಿ ಕರಿಯೋ ತಲೆನೋವು ಸುದಿ ಕರಿಯೋ ಅಂತ. ನಾನೇ ಯಾವುದೋ ಪೇಷಂಟ್ ತಗೊಂಡೋಗಿ ಶಾರ್ಪ್ ಸ್ಮೂತ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಒಳ್ಳೊಳ್ಳೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಬೇಸಿಕಲಿ ದೊಡ್ಡಬಳ್ಳಾಪುರ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ ನಾವೇ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಟ್ಕೋಬಾರ್ದು. ಜನರಲಿ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಸಪೋಸ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಹೈಯರ್ ಇಂಟೆಲೆಕ್ಚುಯಲ್.
We can all say we are.
There are not too many other families here to contradict us.
Immediate examples of these two boys.
Yes.
ಅಲ್ವಾ? ಇವರಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರು ಶ್ರೀನಾಥ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಅವ್ರು ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ನಾನು ಇರೋರು.
Srinath first.
Nobody else was there. And ಒಂದು ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಕ್ಲೂಸಿವ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರಿಸ್ಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಭಿಗುಮಾನ. ಅದು ಸುಲಭವಾಗಿ.
But I'm glad you're accepting finally.
ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಫಿಲ್ಟರ್ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸೋದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ. ಮೆಂಗೋ ಏನೋ ನೋಡೋಣ ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಿಧಾನಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತಾಡೋಣ ಅಂತ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಇನ್ನೇನು ದೂಷಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇನಿಲ್ಲ, ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಕೆಳಮಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಏನಿಲ್ಲ. ಇಬ್ಬರದು
ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಏನಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಲ್ಲ, ಮೇಲ್ಮಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಯಾಕೆ ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಇರಲಿ.
No, but that's a very big family trait. I've seen in my uncles, I see in him, I saw it in Venkatesh.
ಯಾರಿಗೂ ತೊಂದರೆ ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಇನ್ನೇನು
But I have one, sorry. ನಿಮ್ದು ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಅವ್ರ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್. ಅವ್ರು ಈ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಯಾಕೆ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಅಂತ.
ಯಾಕೆ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು?
How? Why did it?
No, eventually it was like a mission for us.
Hey, Suprita has some
My mother was so frustrated that she lost the book. She said, pursue this, I mean, this is the other way to lose this. You're going to lose this information.
He ನೋಡೇ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ.
Heritage. I need to go back and see why they went so deep into the researching the family tree anta. Why they got so deep into researching the family tree anta.
So, Michael Matadi, please.
Family tree ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ for some school assignment actually. So I asked my dad about ಕತೆ ಎಲ್ಲ. I just asked what ಯಾರು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು ಅಂತ. So what he said about his grandfather is that they didn't die in the plague. They were pandits at that time also. So on public debate idante Tripti ಅಥವಾ ಮಂತ್ರಾಲಯ, I'm a little confused, okay? Tripti I think. And Ali, he defeated somebody who was very renowned at that time. So his students or disciples or whatever poisoned him and haloina kotrante, and that's what they say, that he died.
Both husband and wife.
Yeah, so it was very hung, and that's what they suspect. Nobody really did post-mortem or anything those days, right? So that's what they suspect. And his own father, he spoke about this Kashi thing, and Usha or somebody has told it.
For those of us who are very young, what is this Kashi thing?
Kashi is Banaras.
No. What is the Kashi thing? What is the story? I know where it comes.
The story is that at around the age of 8 or something like that, he went to Kumbakonam, after all the story that he said, no, that he was a very small boy. Then from there, I think around 13, 14 something, made his way to Kashi. Then studied there in the Sanskrit Pathashala there. Kumbakonam also Sanskrit Pathashala. Then Banaras Hindu University. Then came back, I think met his grandfather. And then on the way to Mysore, Yado Manali, Yaro Brahmanra Manila, that man was so impressed with him, he wanted him to marry his daughter. So this our grandmother got so scared, Madhyaratri wore to them. This one, I think Usha, Usha or Bharti, somebody has told Usha only, I think. So this is what my dad had told me when I had asked.
Do we have pictures? How far back do we have pictures of people?
I think they have up to 60s or 70s.
My grandfather we have. Yeah. And Vasudevachar is there.
Their entire family.
Vasudevachar photo with Bada is
So his father, Krishnamurti, and his mother certainly we have.
Okay.
So that's those are the.
Can be a good addition to the PDF.
Those 6 are certainly worth keeping in one place.
Yeah, with the name, that family.
Yeah.
If somebody was talking about family traits, what is common that you see in family? One of the things that you will notice in this particular set of families, we try to be as independent as possible, tremendously independent. We just don't want to bow our heads to anybody. That's the sort of trait that you will see that's running around. To take all of the cousins, and that is my previous generation cousins, every one of them, barring my father, every one of them has remained an independent person. That is, they are answerable to themselves alone. Only my father did service. That was the only exception, and there were circumstances under which he had to do that. But other than that, every one of them has sort of towed their own line.
Highly entrepreneurial.
Highly independent.
Great, I find. For our Kalake,
What they say, they will say, heck with you, man. Chikkappa, that is her father, was probably going to make it to be a very big shot, in Indian industry. But he just, within a matter of a few days, he made a decision that he's going to leave that job.
Lots of good stories about that.
All good stories. So he just left it. He just walked out of a fantastic job.
Belfast to get further training, etc., etc. So he goes away to Belfast for 3 years. He's in Belfast in 1950. 56, 57, 58 kind of years he's gone to Belfast. And then he comes to tell his mother, I'm going to cross the seas. So he says, once you cross, you're done. You're done, etc. So my uncle is a very resourceful man, and my grandmother can easily sway. So he says, don't worry, I'll get you diamonds. Brings some diamonds and he said, now I've come with diamond, you want to see me? He said, yeah. So that's what it is. So then he comes back to Calcutta, then marries my aunt, and they live in Hunur.
They are newly married. Satya and Prabha's tennis, no, Aarti? Tennis. Oh, do you have that photo? It's so nice. Both of them playing tennis. Really. So
I still
She would meet my dad.
She was a great swimmer.
She was a great swimmer also. At that age, imagine she had learned swimming.
So I'll ask a very leading distinct question. ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಆ ತರ ಸೂಪರ್ ಇಂಟೆಲಿಜೆನ್ಸ್ ನಿಮ್ಮಿಬ್ಬರಲ್ಲಿ?
Lot of good stories.
Great stories.
The diamonds, no, nothing to do with any of our families, but Continental ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ರೆಸ್ಟೋರೆಂಟ್ ಇತ್ತು ಗೊತ್ತಾ? Brigade Road ನಲ್ಲಿ restaurant. So Continental is a Chinese chain. So those people had leased out that restaurant. So that fellow, whoever they leased it out from, he said give it back at that lease. So there were some 5 Chang children, Sharon Chang, whoever went to Mount Carmel Fat. Okay, so all of them were going to give back the
That is Mari and all,
Mari and all. So then the youngest daughter, who's in the US, said, vaguely vaguely I remember, vaguely when I was a small girl, our father had passed away. He had come from China. That there is something buried under those boards, wooden boards. So in the night they went every day removing and finally seeing what rubbish, nothing, there seemed to be all kinds of crap is there underneath. But they found huge big treasure.
Wow.
So that's how all these giants now have all these type and shape and all the restaurants came. Oh, like diamonds, jewels, so much it got from China and buried. And if this child had not remembered, it would just be there.
Gone.
ಯಾರಿಗೂ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಯಾರಿಗೂ ನಮ್ಕ ಇಲ್ವಾ ಆ ಥರ